Have you ever wondered why certain Bible stories are never told in church? Some narratives seem to be whispered, almost as if their existence is too powerful, too dangerous to reveal. One of these stories is that of Tamar, a name mentioned in the Bible, but one whose tale remains largely ignored. Today, we're going to uncover the full truth about Tamar. You'll learn who she really was, why her story is so troubling, and most importantly, the extraordinary role she played in one of the greatest plans in history. Buckle up, because the revelation of Tamar's story will completely change how you view courage, justice, and divine purpose. This is a story that is not for the faint-hearted. It's a story of strength when all seems lost, of justice when society condemns you, and how God uses what the world often casts aside. Keep watching until the very end, because the story of Tamar will leave you in awe. Everything you thought you knew about this woman is about to be turned upside down. How many times have you heard a sermon about Tamar? The truth is probably never, and that's no accident. Her story is recorded in the sacred pages of Genesis, but it's as if it's hidden in plain sight. There are certain Bible stories that pastors love to preach on: David and Goliath, Moses and the Red Sea, Daniel and the lions. But Tamar, she's never really talked about. Why? Because Tamar's story is uncomfortable. It forces us to grapple with difficult topics like injustice, the courage of women, and the way God works through scandalous situations. It's a story that challenges our traditional understanding of morality and redemption. But today, we're going to break the silence and uncover why Tamar's story is one that needs to be shared, celebrated, and honored. Tamar deserves to be remembered, not as a mere footnote in the Bible, but as a true example of faith and determination. Now, imagine this. Over 3,800 years ago, a young woman walked through the scorching deserts of Canaan. The sun burned her skin, but it wasn't the heat that troubled her. It was the weight of despair that pressed heavily on her shoulders. Tamar was not just another name in ancient genealogies. She was a real person with real dreams, living in a time when a woman's future was completely tied to the men in her family. Her name, Tamar, means palm tree, a tree that stands firm against the strongest winds and can find water even in the driest of deserts. Prophetic, isn't it? Tamar would need all the strength of that palm tree to endure what lay ahead. Tamar was married to Er, the son of Judah, one of the 12 sons of Jacob. It seemed like a good match, and the future looked bright. But then, Er died young, and the Bible tells us that his death came because he was wicked in the sight of God. Genesis 38, verse 7. That was the beginning of Tamar's tragedy. A young widow, childless in a society where women without children were seen as cursed. But there was hope. The law of levirate marriage. According to this law, when a husband died, his brother was supposed to marry the widow and give her a child to carry on the family name. Tamar was about to discover that divine laws weren't always followed by the men who were supposed to protect her. And in the end, she would teach us something profound about how, when the justice of men fails, God's justice can still prevail, often through unexpected means. Tamar's story begins with Judah, her father-in-law, a respected patriarch. After Er's death, Judah promised Tamar that she would marry his third son, Shelah, when he came of age. The law of levirate marriage wasn't just a cultural tradition. It was a divine command that ensured the name of the deceased would live on. For Tamar, this law was not just a matter of social duty. It was her only hope of finding dignity, purpose, and a future. She believed Judah's promise. She returned to her father's house to wait for Shelah to grow up. But what Tamar didn't know was that Judah had already begun to break his word. Time passed. Years went by. Shelah grew into a man, and yet nothing happened. Judah did not fulfill his promise. Why? The Bible is clear, though painful. Judah was afraid. 2 of his sons had died after being with Tamar, and he began to see her as a threat. He thought that Tamar brought bad luck, that she was somehow cursed. It was easier for Judah to break his promise than risk losing his 3rd son, Shelah. But here's the thing Judah didn't understand. When a promise is made before God, there are consequences for breaking it. Tamar was about to teach Judah and all of us an important lesson. When human justice fails, God has a way of making things right, sometimes in the most surprising ways. Years passed, and Judah's promise turned to dust. Tamar's hope was all but gone. She had become one of the forgotten women of the Bible, a widow with no children, relegated to the margins of society, a woman with no place in a world that values male protection. Imagine the pain Tamar must have felt attending every wedding, seeing other women give birth, and knowing that she had been denied those same blessings. It wasn't just about children, it was about her place in society, her dignity, her right to have a voice. But now, let's take a moment and pause here. If this story is touching your heart, if you're finding inspiration in Tamar's strength, please do us a favor and hit the subscribe button. Like this video and share it with anyone who needs to hear Tamar's story. Stories like this, stories that challenge the status quo, need to be told. Your support helps us bring more of these forgotten, powerful narratives to light. So, back to the story. Tamar had been wronged. Judah had not only broken his personal promise, but he had also broken a divine commandment. He had condemned her to a life of loneliness, despair, and emptiness. What's worse, everyone knew about it, but no one did anything. Society simply accepted it as normal. Powerful men can break their promises without consequence. But Tamar's story was about to take a radical turn. She was about to take matters into her own hands, even if it meant risking everything. What would you do if every door was closed in your face? If every promise made to you was broken? If society and the world turned their back on you? Tamar made a bold decision. She would act. And what she did next is one of the most surprising and courageous moves in the entire Bible. When she learned that Judah would be passing through a nearby town, Tamar disguised herself. She took off her widow's clothes, which symbolized her forgotten, rejected state, and put on a veil. She sat by the roadside, waiting for Judah to pass by. Now, this was a risky move. If anyone found out who she was, she could be executed for what she was about to do. But Tamar had reached the point where she could no longer live a life of silence and shame. She would rather risk everything than accept the injustice that had defined her life up to that point. Judah, unaware of who she was, mistook Tamar for a prostitute and approached her. The same man who had broken his promise to her now sought her out, unaware that she was the woman he had wronged. The irony was not lost on Tamar, but it was also prophetic. God was about to use this scandalous situation to fulfill his purposes. Tamar, ever the clever one, demanded a pledge from Judah, a guarantee that he would send her payment for her services. Judah, not recognizing her, promised to send a young goat. But Tamar, not trusting Judah, asked for his personal items as collateral: his signet ring, cord, and staff. These items would be unmistakable proof of his identity. 3 months later, news came to Judah. Tamar was pregnant. Judah was furious. He immediately called for her to be brought out and burned for her alleged sin. Little did he know that the person he was condemning was the very woman he had wronged. The story was about to take a shocking twist, one that would reveal not only Judah's hypocrisy, but also the incredible lengths God was willing to go to in order to bring justice to his people. Judah, the very man who had abandoned his promise, now stood as a harsh judge, ready to condemn to death the woman he had forgotten. The irony was palpable, but what happened next would change everything. As Tamar was being led to her execution, she sent a powerful message with the very items that had been given to her as collateral: Judah's signet ring, cord, and staff. With a message, "By the man to whom these belong, I am pregnant." The moment was electrifying. Tamar's message was not just a declaration of truth. It was a revelation of the injustice she had endured. Judah, upon seeing the items, immediately knew the truth. His belongings, his personal items, had been in the hands of the woman he had wronged. There was no denying it, no escaping the truth. Judah's own shame was now exposed, and in front of everyone, he was forced to admit what had been buried in silence for so long. "She is more righteous than I," Judah said. These words were not just a confession. They echoed through the ages. Judah, a respected patriarch, a man of influence, was forced to acknowledge that the woman he had cast aside, the woman he had abandoned, was more righteous than he had ever been. This was a pivotal moment in history. Tamar had won, not just for herself, but in a way that was far greater than anyone could have imagined. Her courage, her determination, her fight for justice, all came to a head in this one moment. Tamar's victory wasn't just about her personal vindication. It was about something far grander, a divine purpose that had been hidden in the shadows, waiting to be revealed. What seemed like a scandal, what seemed like a tragedy, was in fact the unfolding of God's justice. Tamar's courage had led her to act in the face of impossible circumstances, and that very act became a catalyst for something much larger than anyone could comprehend at the time. But there was more to this story, far more. Tamar's act of courage wasn't just a personal win. It was a victory for God's justice, working through what seemed like an impossible situation. Tamar had not sought revenge, nor had she sought to destroy Judah. She had simply sought what was rightfully hers, the fulfillment of a promise that had been ignored, a promise that had been broken. She had been the victim of injustice, and yet, through her bold action, she was about to fulfill a greater purpose. Tamar's story reveals to us something profound about God's character. He does not abandon the abandoned. He does not forget the forgotten. When human systems fail, when promises are broken, when injustice seems to reign, God is still working behind the scenes. But Tamar's redemption didn't stop with her personal vindication. She was not only restored, but also honored in a way that no one could have predicted. She gave birth to twins, Perez and Zerah. These two sons were not just the fruit of her courage. They were part of the fulfillment of a divine plan that had been nearly thwarted by human negligence. Tamar's story shows us that God works through the most unlikely people to accomplish his most important purposes. Tamar's story is a testament to the fact that God does not reject the rejected. He does not forget the forgotten. Tamar had been overlooked, cast aside, and even condemned by the very people who should have protected her. But God saw her. He saw her pain. He saw her courage, and he used her to bring about his divine plan. Tamar's story teaches us that God does not need perfect people to accomplish his will. He doesn't need our lives to be neat and tidy to use us for His glory. In fact, He often chooses the most complicated, the most broken, and the most scandalous stories to reveal His greatest works. And here is the most shocking part of the story. Tamar, the woman who was almost stoned to death, the woman who was called a prostitute, the woman who was forgotten by society, became part of the lineage of Jesus Christ. Yes, you heard that right. Tamar's son, Perez, became an ancestor of the Messiah. In Matthew 1 verse 3, we read, Judah begot Perez and Zerah by Tamar. What was once seen as a controversial and shameful story became a cornerstone of God's eternal plan. God didn't hide Tamar's story. He didn't erase it because of its scandalous circumstances. Instead, He highlighted it. He celebrated her courage. He made her an indispensable part of the story of redemption. Tamar, a woman who had been cast aside, now stands as one of the most honored women in history. This truth reveals something powerful about God's character. He is not ashamed to use flawed people. He doesn't require our lives to be perfect before He chooses us for His purposes. In fact, He specializes in transforming the broken, the rejected, and the complicated into instruments of His grace. Tamar's story shows us that there is no situation too messy, no story too lost for God to redeem. There is no place so far from His reach that He cannot transform it into something glorious. So, what can we learn from Tamar's story today? What profound biblical message does her life hold for us? First, we learn that we should never accept injustice passively. Tamar's story teaches us that there are times when we must take a stand, even when it's difficult, even when it puts us at risk. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's doing what's right despite our fear. Second, we learn that God sees when we are neglected. He sees when our needs are ignored. He sees our tears. He sees our suffering. And He has a way of restoring what was unjustly taken from us. Third, we learn that our complicated histories do not disqualify us from God's purposes. Tamar's past was controversial, but that didn't stop God from using her to bring about His greatest plan. Tamar's life reminds us that God can use anyone, no matter their past, no matter their flaws, to fulfill His purposes. Tamar's story is still relevant today because we still live in a world full of injustice, where promises are broken, where the powerful forget the vulnerable, where systems fail to protect the most marginalized. In these moments, Tamar's story calls us to have courage, to trust that God has a plan, even when things seem impossible. Her story didn't end in tragedy. It ended in triumph. And our story can too, no matter how complicated it may seem right now. Tamar's courage is a reminder that God never abandons those who are wronged. He can transform our deepest pain into the most powerful purpose. If you are facing injustice today, if you feel forgotten, if you feel like your needs have been ignored, remember Tamar. Her story shows us that when we take a stand for what's right, even when it's hard, God is working behind the scenes, writing a story far bigger than we can see. If this story has touched your heart, I encourage you to subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and share it with someone who needs to hear that God never forgets the forgotten. Leave a comment and let us know what part of Tamar's story impacted you the most. And remember, your story is still being written. Tamar's story teaches us that God can use even the most rejected, the most overlooked, the most complicated lives for His glory. It's never too late for God to transform your story into a testimony of His grace. May Tamar's courage inspire you today, and may your faith in God's perfect plan be renewed. Always remember, For God, there are no disposable people, just people waiting to discover the extraordinary purpose He has for them.